boy Anime Princess, and today we're covering my League starter of choice for the upcoming Settlers 2.0 reboot, Poisonous Concoction. This is by far one of the easiest builds to play, and it's great even if you just want to hit a quick level 50 to get your free mystery box. Easily playable in SSF, and it's even stronger when done in SC trade. The scope of this League Start guide will be to carry you through everything non-Uber related on a very low budget. So that would include the 4 voidstones, all your map favorite boss fights, and some juice mapping strategies. While you may be able to take this into Uber boss fights, the gear in this guide is extremely cheap and is not meant for that kind of content. I will be League starting this myself on twitch.tv/animeprincess, and I plan to do all the aforementioned content. You will get video updates on YouTube as well, so make sure to hit the follow button if you are looking for that. My long-term plan is to take this into juice maps to farm up some big items as well as extra currency in order to make an eventual swap over to Poison Spark. This is going to be fairly expensive, so this guide is purely focused on the Pconc skill and having a strong start with it. For this build, we can use an extreme poverty setup that is strictly rare gear. However, I also have suggestions for common budget uniques to further enhance our power. You can find all of this in the attached Path to Building file, which comes with a complete written notes section to help make the rest of this video more of an optional viewing experience. As for this build stats, we have enough damage to do all the regular stuff, and we are very defensively focused to be able to handle difficult maps. With a cheap budget, we achieve spell suppression cap, quite a high evade chance that can be pushed into the 90s with a Vol of Grace activation. The build has 70% attack block, and we also have a massive 70 fizz taken as Ellie to avoid any scary hits that somehow squeak through both the evasion and block layers. Our Anoint gives us endurance charges while mapping, and this is really meant to be a cheap mapping build in the grand scheme of things. We are able to do the bosses, but Pconc is not a natural boss. I've League started this build twice in this current patch, the first being in the BPL League, and the second being in Arrow's recent Group Self-Found League. So it definitely has been stress tested and iterated upon to a point where I feel comfortable sharing it with you guys. I guess we can take a quick look at the prob and give a brief rundown of the leveling process. The Path to Building file is pretty straightforward. I'd recommend going immediately to the notes section when you open this. I do give a bunch of information in here. The Bandit, Alira. For the gearing, we only have one tab showing, like, you know, these are some uniques you might want to go for. Basically, all the gear is just filling your res, filling your attributes. There's nothing special, although I suppose there are the Eldritch Implicits to aim for in there. If you can't get all those uniques, again, we have alternative suggestions and some explanations of what these items do and why we're going for them. There's just, you know, it's not too much of a read. Everything in here I'd say is quite useful. But for the League Start, we're going to take this endgame budget setup, scroll it right back down to the first tree, levels 1 through 12. And each one of these trees has a matching skill gem progression to show you the skill gems you should be aiming for in the campaign. So levels 1 through 12, we're going to be using a bow with caustic arrow. And after you hit level 12, you will get the gem Poisonous Concoction, which means we can progress onto the second tree. So with Poison Concoction, you don't use a main hand because it's an unarmed skill. You can use a shield though. And we are scaling some flask nodes because Poisonous Concoction pulls charges out of your life flask in order to do damage. This also means the higher the value on the life flask, the more damage you do. So you're always going to be wanting to upgrade your life flasks. And in the end game, you're going to want to go for a saturated prefix because this gives you the biggest value for the life recovery. And that will in turn give you the most damage. All right, so after you finish the next tree that says normal lab, that's a cue to go into the first lab. I suggest going Master Toxicist first, which helps our poisons prolif. It also increases our damage. So when you're fighting a boss, press a flask and you'll have 20% chance to do a lot more damage. Now, Next up, we progress all the way to Cruel Lab. Some more flask nodes down here. Now, I don't like to use Life Tap for my build. I instead go for Clever Thief, which gives us 1% attack damage, leeches mana, as well as the mastery for instant leech. And this is nice because it eases the socket pressure, so we don't have to be so picky on our gear. We can actually get some good stats on it. Yeah, after this, we're going to go into Cruel Lab, and I like to go Nature's Adrenaline, which gives us more flask charges back, which in turn helps us maintain our flask for Poison Concoction. For the Merc Lab, and we just spread it out further, and now we're going for Nature's Reprisal, which increases our damage by inflicting Wither on enemies. Okay, next up we have a tree for the Pconc of Bouncing swap. So the way Pconc of Bouncing differs from regular Pconc is that instead of throwing all your flasks at once, Pconc of Bouncing throws a single flask, and that flask is either going to shotgun the enemy based on all of your projectiles, or if there are multiple enemies, it's going to chain randomly around those enemies, killing in a big area. So in order to maximize Pconc of Bouncing, we're going to want to have as many projectiles as possible. If you look at the skill gem setup, all the way up until the Pconc of Bouncing swap, we're just using Greater Volley. But once we swap, we need to make sure we have Greater Volley as well as Greater Multiple Projectiles. Also on the tree, make sure you have Multi-Shot, which gives us an additional projectile. And also, we're going to want to path down to Trick Shot for 30% increased chaining range. And this is mostly actually to get the projectile mastery. Projectiles deal 20% increased damage with hits and elements for each time they have chained. And since we are chaining 11 times with all of this stuff, that is a lot of damage. The way to calculate that actually is in the config. For the number of times the skill is chained, you want to choose the median of the total number of projectiles. So since I have 11, I guess it would be 5.5. Does that, you can't put a decimal though, so I'm just going to round it down to 5. There's actually a medium cluster node that is similarly powerful to this extremely powerful mastery called Follow Through. So eventually you're going to want to get a projectile damage cluster and chaos spam it for Follow Through, or if you're in Trade League, you could just buy it. And the way to accurately calculate your damage for Pconc would be to go to your Pconc of Bouncing, and for the count, you put the number of projectiles, so probably 11, and then include in full DPS down here. And if you have Fury Valve, you can actually bump that number up to 13. As for the skills for the endgame setup, we've got the Poison's Concoction of Bouncing 6th link. So we got obviously Greater Volley, Greater Multiple Projectiles, and these 3 other skill gems do have Awakened variants, which give a lot more damage. However, you'll be fine with the basic ones until you can afford that upgrade. Next up, for the Helmet link, Despair needs to be linked to Hex Bloom. So when you cast your curse on an enemy and you kill the enemy, your curse will prolift to all the nearby enemies. Malevolence and Volgrace just happen to be in the helmet. They don't need to be connected to these other gems. Next up, we have Withering Step, Plague Bearer, Increased Area of Effect, and Power in a 4 link. And Power is a luxury item. However, I'm just showing it here because it is pretty strong when coupled with Plague Bearer. So the way Plague Bearer works is you're going to have a little buff in the top left of your screen that just counts up until it reaches a maximum as you're throwing your flask. And once you max it out, you can press Plague Bearer and it will create a sort of big AoE around your character that does massive damage. It's very similar to RF, but it does poison chaos damage instead. And you should be using this to clear maps faster, and especially you should be using it on bosses. You can charge this up simply by attacking. You don't need to kill anything. Withering Step is a lot of damage because it inflicts a lot of wither in a quick burst. And all of these things benefit from, increased area of effect. So that's why we got that here. Plague Bearer actually only can be supported by increased area of effect and power. There's nothing else that can buff this further. We have shield charge, faster attacks. I have Blood Rage checked in this setup because most of the time you're going to be mapping and you can just press that at the start of your map. You'll get frenzy charges. However, if you are fighting a boss such as, Maven, Uber Elder, something pretty hard, Blood Rage does nothing because it's on kill. So you could drop that, put in Culling Strike, and now suddenly our shield charge will instantly kill the boss when they're at 10% HP. For precision, you don't need to necessarily level this to 20. I would recommend going into your character in game and going to the character sheet, choosing the Poisonous Concoction skill gem, and then looking at your offensive stats for that, and it should show your chance to hit, and you just have to level precision up high enough to get 100% for your normal chance to hit. Flame Dash is our quick getaway skill, and you should note that Withering Step shares a cooldown with Flame Dash, so if you're spamming Withering Step too much, you might not have a charge in Flame Dash, so just be aware of that. We've got Steel Skin coupled with cast when damage taken. Alright, I think that can wrap up this build guide. Again, if you have any questions, first look at the notes. You can also find me on Discord. I'll be live streaming every day, so you can pop in the Twitch chat. My in-game chat channel is global8686. You can use that as a resource. And yeah, we'll be uploading some follow-up content that can push this past this very basic setup with some very budget gear in the coming days after the league starts. So look out for some YouTube updates as well. Hope to see you guys on the beaches on Thursday. Peace.